Going live in 3. All right, we're live. Jason, we're doing this.
Hello.
Welcome to the Amber booth, where we're doing AmberCast. For the 7 people in the audience, they're only going to go bigger. The audience is only going to go bigger. Can you please do an intro and kind of tell the one person who doesn't know who you are? Kind of like do an intro. Who is Jason? What is Execution Labs?
All right. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Jason Della Rocca. I've been in the game industry almost 25 years now. One of the things that I'm involved with or started a few years back is called Execution Labs, which is a early stage kind of hybrid incubator accelerator seed fund for indie games or indie studio startups. But I do a lot of work around ecosystem development and community support programs and things to help developers succeed out there in the world. It's certainly a exciting industry, but challenging industry in many levels. And so a lot of the work that I do is kind of more at the meta level to grow and support the community.
So I think everyone understands what an accelerator is. I think everyone understands how accelerators can kind of fix publishing deals. But when you say at the meta level, and you gave a really good talk about this, you had a fireside chat with Catalin yesterday, but can you explain a bit kind of like how do you influence the metagame?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a whole bunch of things to kind of work on that incubators and accelerators or seed funds help solve. So there's kind of like the problems that need fixing, and then there's the different tools or mechanisms or structures to fix them. And so for startups and indies, some of the challenges they have is access to early stage funding, access to the right partners, publishers, platforms, knowing who to talk to at Steam or Nintendo or Apple or whatever. So connections. Knowledge and learning on how to build a viable business and how to manage a team and how to, make a great game. And, if you're starting out, oftentimes you're younger and less experienced. So just sort of knowledge sharing is one of them, and that kind of discipline around production. So a bunch of those things are some of the challenges that startups have. And so an incubator, ideally a good one, or an accelerator, is helping startups to solve those problems or kind of alleviate those stresses. So an incubator may provide startup funding, so that helps. It may provide access to key contacts at Apple and Google and Unreal or Epic and whatever, or publishers. It should also provide mentorship and coaching and knowledge and so on. And so the idea then is, if the incubator accelerator is providing that kind of help, does that give the startup a better chance to succeed, to make better games, to create a more viable, sustainable business, and of course then to have more economic impact? I mean, that's a super high level view of it, but that's kind of the sort of the short version is these programs are there to kind of help solve or plug in the gaps that indies and or startups tend to have in the game industry.
Mm-hmm. And you guys are doing a lot of things for them, like you mentioned. So you're mentoring them on development aspects, you're mentoring them on business development, you're helping them with business development, you're helping them with funding. What else? Because I'm assuming that you guys are also building a community, right? And community is super important in order to build a game. I have this friend, Liviu, they did Stuck in the Attic. I don't know if you know Stuck in the Attic, super great game, adventure game from Romania. And he was saying, you should start building a community even before you start making the game.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, that's call it the B2C side, right? That's the fan consumer audience side. A lot of the work that we tend to do is sort of industry community. So knowledge exchange, sharing, access to partners and so on and so on. But one of the things that we have done is really push indies to be fan focused. So think about who is their audience, who do they want their fans to be, where are they, on what platforms, which community, like how do you reach them? How do you talk to them efficiently? How do you let them know that your game exists, that your studio exists, and that they should become your fans? And how do you kind of cultivate that community or fan engagement? I mean, a few of the things that we were doing was running very early play tests. So literally, as soon as you had something playable, we were bringing in like gamers and random people from outside to come play the games, give feedback, and so on. So that's something we've done for years. Also, a few years ago, we started something called Disco, short for discoverability. Oh. So it's not an actual disco party, but it's a conference called Disco, because the word discoverability is too long to say every time. So, and that's a conference focused on marketing, discoverability, working with influencers, building community. And so that's been a great event. We also have done stuff like showcase nights where, we'll rent out a big theater, fill it with 500 industry people, get local studios up on stage to present their work in progress games, and then we'll broadcast that to Twitch by tens of thousands of fans, of players around the world, who then will wish list a game or join a Discord, or now are aware of the game being showcased. So now. In fairness, not all of those things were driven specifically by execution labs. There are various other kind of entities and groups and nonprofits and grassroots organizations that I'm involved in or help with or collaborate with. So I'm talking kind of more about the sort of the scene here in Montreal and the kinds of things that we do to help the indie community. But all kinds of different stuff like that. I mean, I can go on and on.
So this is interesting because you're not, I was checking out your resume, and half of your career is game development and game publishing, but then your roots are somewhere else, right? So how did you end up making games, and how were you like, oh, this is what I'm going to do. I know what I'm going to do.
Yeah, well, I mean, the reality is I have no real talent, so I've never actually made a game myself, right? So I'm not a game developer, and I never was one. I've always been working more on the meta community and sort of business side of things. In the very beginning of my career, I was more on the technology and hardware side of things. I worked at Matrox, that does at the time was very famous for doing some of the first 3D graphics chips. So some of the really early, mid 90s graphics hardware accelerators. I mean, that was stuff that we were working on over here. And then working with game developers to make sure that those early games were 3D accelerators. I mean, I remember our team was out in England working with the Tomb Raider team, getting Lara Croft to be 3D accelerated, and like working on the MS-DOS version and doing the 3D acceleration like assembly code, because back then there was no kind of APIs, there was no DirectX, there was no OpenGL that was sort of allowing the games to talk to the hardware and so on. So you had to like get in there in the code and sort of go straight to the metal, as they said. So worked on games, worked with game developers, but much more on the technology side. Similarly with a company called Quasal, who was doing multiplayer middleware and technology, so working on some of the early MMOs and multiplayer games, and then sort of in a weird sort of set of events, I ended up as the director for the IGDA, the International Game Developers Association, and that was a big shift, and really where more of the kind of the meta community stuff started. And that was 9 years running the IGDA.
You guys were changing the world with IGDA, because over here in Romania, we're like, oh, look at what these guys are doing. How do we join them? And it was like, I think about it. And I think that's when, by the time people had heard of IGDA, they were like, oh, why don't we do that here? How do we? So even from over there, you kind of sparked things on the other side of the world, which is like massive impact. So you built that, and then you were like, okay, I'm going to do execution labs.
Yeah, well, so to clarify, I didn't start IGDA. IGDA was started in the mid 90s. The founders were, well, it was mainly kind of credited to Ernest Adams and a few of the other developers that were also involved in GDC at the time. There was kind of like this split where GDC became a more commercially run conference or event. And then a bunch of the developers said, well, we need an association to kind of represent our interests and advocate for us kind of independently from the conference itself. And so the IGDA was born kind of 94, 95. When I got involved was the year 2000. I mean, the organization was still relatively small. I mean, when I started, I was handed a spreadsheet with 500 names on and said, here's the member list. And it was very kind of California centric, very American centric, because that's, where it started. And also the GDC as the nexus point was down there in California. After 9 years, when I left, that spreadsheet became a database of almost 150,000 members from all over the world. And of course, dozens and dozens of chapters and committees and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was interesting. It was sort of an interesting time to kind of build that type of, or grow that structure as the industry itself was maturing, and sort of education was coming up, talent pipelines, business opportunities, even just sort of the language of game design and how to make games was sort of evolving and maturing. So that, I mean, it was a wonderful experience, an amazing opportunity. It was super challenging, but really enjoyed it. And kind of set the groundwork, I suppose, in many ways in terms of thinking of community, thinking of ecosystems, thinking about what can be done to enable developers to succeed and have viable careers, successful careers, et cetera, and really kind of working top to bottom, right? So with governments and schools, and industry and investors and everything top to bottom, you start to kind of see the matrix a little bit of how all the pieces fit together. When I left IGDA, I mean, there was no job for me to do, like going to be a producer at a studio, or like there was no, like when you're working on this kind of global matrix thing, it's like so complex and fascinating to like go get a job. It just didn't seem like so interesting. And so I figured, well, I'll just be a consultant and, help people out. And I ended up doing early work with governments around the world. So this is a bit the conversation I had with Catalin yesterday about advising governments on how to support and grow and nurture their local game industry and how to do that effectively. And one of the things that I would often talk about would be the need for mentorship, seed funding, incubation programs, startup support, all these kinds of challenges that we mentioned at the beginning of our conversation. But as a consultant, I just advise you. I don't have to do the work. It's like, Gabi, you should do this, go. It's like I'm a trainer, right? Like, hey, do some jumping jacks and push-ups. I don't have to do the work. It's you that. Anyway, so I was advising people on doing this and recommending it as part of the solution. And I was approached from some investors here in Canada who said, hey, we've heard you've been talking about these kinds of concepts. Like, why don't you actually do it and like do it yourself and do it here? And I'm like, oh, well, geez, like, you kind of have blinders on. It's like I was in consulting mode and I was just telling other people they should do it, whether it was Brazil or Australia or Romania or whatever. And then when the investors kind of said, well, we'd be curious to back something like that. Well, that kind of lit a spark and got the ball rolling, and kind of really where Execution Labs and the early concept came from.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because you had seen kind of like you say, you had seen the matrix, because everyone knows that most game developers suck at entrepreneurship,
marketing,
publishing. And generally they go into game development because they need some sort of way to express themselves. They think they can do it. They get very ambitious. Most indies that I know, I would never trade my job for their job. It's crazy. The amount of work that those guys do is crazy. And the amount of effort that they put in. Because if you don't know marketing and you don't know entrepreneurship, which is like 70% of what you're actually going to do, you're going to do like 30% game development, and the rest is going to be, how do I keep my business going? Where do I get the money? how do I build a community, and so on. So I don't even want, because everything is a huge effort. When you don't know, when you're reinventing the wheel, everything is like you're reinventing the wheel. It's super difficult. So, but you had already known this because you had seen IGDA, but then you were also working with, like, you were seeing things at a global level. Was it pure luck, or were you like, this is the insight that's going to make this thing work? Because you guys are more than a publisher. You guys actually mentor and grow people and kind of foster them along the way.
Yeah.
So was it pure luck, or were you like, I'm going to build towards this?
It went fuzzy all of a sudden.
It went fuzzy, I know, yeah.
It's like, I don't know, there's too much glare on my head.
I was hoping it was the drinks.
There we go. Yeah, I mean, I guess when you're around long enough, you start to see the patterns of why and how studios fail.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned a few of them, and that they're kind of driven by passion and they're not thinking about marketing and business and funding and all that kind of stuff. And so part of the insight was, can we provide some kind of discipline to this? Can we have a cheat sheet almost that allows you to have an unfair advantage to not make all the normal mistakes or make many less mistakes? And kind of get, like, by working with us, it gives you a leg up to reach that success, because I'm there kind of beating you up and giving you the tough love, so that you don't kind of fall flat on your face. So that was sort of part of the insight. I mean, the other part was, having been around for so long and being in that IGDA role where, I can go anywhere on the planet and I will know people in the game industry and have friends, connections, can call in favors, whatever. And so part of that thinking was, if any of those startups need to talk to someone at Xbox, or they need a dev kit, or there's a problem on their Steam store page, or whatever, it's like a speed dial away, because we have those friends or have those relationships, have those connections, that if you're starting up in the middle of nowhere, not that it's impossible to reach those organizations, you can, and often they're open to it, but you're kind of swimming upstream against all the other noise. Whereas if I call my friend at Valve, for example, hopefully we'll get a much quicker response and resolution to whatever problem. So though, that kind of access or connections was also part of that unfair advantage we were giving to the studios that we were investing in.
Of course, and it's facilitation. At the end of the day, this is facilitation, and everything kind of serves a bigger purpose, which is, this is a business, and people need to pay taxes, they need to pay salaries. So money is needed. Money is very, very much needed. I want to go back to something that you said, which is, you guys were giving them a cheat sheet, and you were giving them kind of like the discipline to do things. I'm a big fan of systems. I think like disciplined entrepreneurship, the kind of like the website and accelerator that is happening in United. It's not in the United States. It's the United States of Arabia, but I'm gonna mess it up. I think. Yes.
Arab Emirates.
So I think that's great, and that's kind of giving people a framework. I'm a fan of game design thinking, because, again, I think it gives you a framework, and you no longer have to make things up. And you gave a talk at GDC back in 2017 about, like, here's some super high level insights of what you should figure out before you start making the game. I'm a big fan of that talk, because that kind of blew my mind. It was my second year at Amber. And we had developed a game for Disney, and we're kind of, it's easy to make games for other people. It's super difficult to build your own game. And we're kind of trying to figure out how to make our own game. And mind you, we were in a business. So we were a studio within a studio. We were trying to make the first original IP. We were trying to get our heads around it. It took us so long. So your talk in 2017 was super enlightening. You talk about the importance of marketing. Can we go into that for a bit? Because I think that's very, very important for game developers, because most of them go into business because they want to make their own game. And it's not about that. If you're building a business, it's not about making your game. It's about, like, it's the It's the 3P. It's the 4Ps.
Yeah, you remember.
So can you talk a bit about that, because I think it's so good.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot to talk about on this topic. I mean, on the one hand, there's nothing wrong with making the game you want to make that you're passionate about. So nothing wrong with that. And in fact, it's wonderful about games is that it is this kind of expressive medium, and it's kind of like the new canvas where you can paint bits and bytes and whatever. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with kind of hobby projects and passion projects and all that kind of stuff. I think that the issue becomes when your expectation that your hobby project will make you a millionaire, or will kind of take you out of that starvation. Like, I'm a starving artist, and my passion project will be my pathway to become less of a starving artist. So I think it's sort of the challenge or disconnect there is expectations, and I always want to be clear, because there's nothing wrong with making games that you're passionate about. Just don't expect usually that will turn you into a millionaire. So with that kind of out of the way, if your intent is to actually build a business and pay salaries and buy food for your family, and like this is going to be your profession, then it's kind of reckless to not be thinking about business and entrepreneurship and funding and marketing and all that. So that's kind of step one is like, are you in this to be professional? If that's the case, then you can't just be an artist. You have to be an entrepreneur.
You have to make money. It's Gabi says it, like, start with the end in mind. Rule number one: start with the end in mind.
Yeah, exactly. So now, with that being said, the most important marketing decision you will ever make is your game design. And so part of the challenge is that many developers do not see that link, right? They see separately, there's a game to be made with cool art and gameplay and cool tech and all the sort of fun game making stuff. And then there's this other thing that needs to get done, which is the marketing thing, to go tell the world that we made an awesome, cool game. And that's basically the worst way to think about marketing. And so this brings us to what you brought up, the 4 Ps, in that, you open up a textbook on marketing, and a classic book, and you'll see what's called the 4 Ps of marketing. And it's price. So thinking about the business model, well, how do we price it? All that kind of stuff. In our case, it's even things like, is it premium? Is it free to play? Do I make the DLCs free or not? Do I use episodic? All that kind of stuff around pricing. There's place, which traditionally place means like, okay, which street corner do I build my pizza shop? That's a marketing decision, is like, where do I put my store or whatever? In the context of games, place is like distribution platform. Is this mobile or console? Do I put it on Steam or the Unreal store? Whatever. Do I sell it from my website or not, or this kind of stuff? So place. The other one is promotion. And promotion tends to be the one that most people think is marketing, right? Promotion is sending out press releases and doing all the going to shows and sort of making noise and making announcements and putting the tweets. It's all the sort of promoting that this game exists. And so a lot of developers, when they think of marketing, they're really thinking of promotion, not thinking about these other things. And then the 4th P is product. So thinking about the product, who's it for, who's the audience, what are the features, does it serve that audience, how do we design it, etc. Thinking about product is part of the marketing equation. And so that's why I said before that the most important marketing decision you'll make is the product or the game design. And also I kind of funnily say that all game designers are marketers. Whether they like to admit it or accept it or not, if you are making decisions about your pricing and which platforms you're going to be on and how the game design, like those are marketing related questions. And so, most designers would never call themselves marketers, but fundamentally they are doing marketing.
Well, most of them are artists. And I'm sorry, I took a stab, and that was totally uncalled for. But let's talk a bit about the 4th P, which is product, because I think this is super important, and it kind of Apparently it might bump heads with what we were discussing earlier on, which is games are a canvas, games are a way of expression. But then if you're going to be successful with the game, the first thing, which is a big piece of marketing, is market research. And as a good game designer, you do have to be a amazing market researcher. Right? But doesn't that bump heads with your way of expression? Doesn't that bump heads with what you want to do in the game?
Yeah, I mean, listen, if you win the lottery and you have no kind of concerns in the world and you just want to express yourself, then go for it. I mean, unfortunately, most of us don't live in that reality. And so we go back to this kind of questions of thinking, well, what am I actually trying to achieve? What is my definition of success? If my definition of success is 100% artistic expression, well, then I'm on a different path, right? Then I'm applying to art foundations and maybe working with museums and galleries on creating works of art that are playable, or it's a different world. And it's valid. There's nothing wrong with that. But then don't come crying when your playable piece of art sells 5 copies on Steam. Like there's always has to be sort of an alignment of expectation, what you're producing and the outcomes. But yeah, so I hear your point. Like, you don't want to end up making a game via spreadsheet, right? Like where you did a whole bunch of research.
I don't think there's anything wrong with making a game. Like over at Amber, we make my teams make casual games, which are all about making games per spreadsheet. I love making games like that. I love knowing that I'm going to publish a game. Here's the KPIs that it's going to hit. If it doesn't hit those KPIs, here are the features that we have backed up. Here's what we're targeting for, and so on. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'm just wondering, is there a way to mix the two?
Yeah, I mean, there is. I mean, it's a spectrum, right? Like one end of the spectrum is 100% art with no kind of care in the world about what's going on or whatever. I'm just going to express myself.
Mm-hmm.
Then all the way at the other end is 100% sort of data-driven analysis of the market. Like, we make no creative decisions. We're making decisions based on what the crunching of the numbers tell us. And I mean, I suppose there's value or merit in both extremes, but I think the real magic happens somewhere in the middle, where you still have passion, creativity, kind of innovative insights, and then the data and the research kind of gives you some sense of where the market opportunities may lie. And that, I think, at the end of the day, is the real kind of magic, and where a lot of the successful studios have been, is to kind of find that happy in between. Some may be leaning a bit more towards the spreadsheet, some leaning maybe a little bit more towards the pure art, but some kind of combination thereof. And I mean, as an example, genre analysis is absolutely critical. It's rare that game developers, certainly the more passionate ones, or the more, the younger ones, less experienced ones, will do any form of genre analysis or landscape analysis before embarking on their project. So for example, we'll sit around and say, "Oh man, hey Gabi, what games do you like to play?" "Oh, I like party games, like where we can sit on the sofa and play together and cheer and drink beer and whatever. Those games are a blast."
Good luck with COVID.
Yeah, not even factoring COVID, but so let's say we love local co-op, kind of couch co-op games, and it's a blast. So we say, let's make one, and actually they're not so hard to make, because we don't have to worry about networking code. We only have to build kind of a few levels. It's in many cases a single screen. So there's a lot. It's like, hey man, we're being really smart. This is actually a genre that's kind of doable, and it's just the two of us, and we're just getting started. So let's go do it. And we spend 3 months, 6 months. We build a prototype. It's fun. We show our friends. They come over on the couch. They cheer. Maybe we even go to a convention like Gamescom or a PAX, or
set up a webcam. Get the clips from people cheering.
Exactly. And so we have confidence that we have a great game on our hands, and maybe it is in fact a fun game. But when the game is released, it doesn't sell. Whether or not we did some promotion or hustling, but at the end of the day, no one's really buying couch co-op. And we're like so disappointed, and we couldn't understand because everybody was cheering at PAX and we have the clips and whatever. And all it would take is 5 minutes a year ago, Steam Spy, to punch in, local multiplayer, couch co-op, whatever, party, brawl, like the various tags, and notice that on average, those games sell extremely poorly. Like really like 100 copies, 1,000 copies, like really, really poor. And so if we had done that research when we had the thought of doing a couch co-op, it's, okay, well, that sounds cool. Let's go check quick and see what that opportunity might look like. On average, we would have seen like, oh crap, well, if we actually want to pay ourselves with this and the average is 500 copies sold, like maybe this is not a good genre of game to approach.
Yeah.
So I mean that's like how do you reconcile that? And ideally you do that at the beginning when we're in sort of brainstorm mode, because if we abandon the brainstorm, it cost us an afternoon and a beer, right? It's not like we spent 6 months of development time. And so that's kind of the type of stuff that seems so trivial, but many developers don't do. And so, okay, well then we say, okay, well, couch co-op, no good. Well, what else do we want to do? Oh, we like, Japanese RPGs. All right, let's look those up. And then you say, oh, well, actually, the average is more like 100,000 copies. And in the past year, there were 10 games that each sold 1 million copies each. Okay, that's like an interesting kind of pool of games to jump into. If we hit the average, that at least sort of pays our salaries for a year. If we do something really good and compete for the good ones, well, now we're off to the races with hundreds of thousands of. I mean, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to win just because 10 other games sold 1 million, but it's like I call it a landscape analysis, and each genre is kind of like a mountain. It's like a hill, and you're trying to determine which hill is big enough to be worth climbing. And the problem is, if you don't do your landscape analysis, you're standing at the bottom of all the hills, and it's full of clouds, and you look up and you can't see because you didn't even look. Yeah. Right? So you don't know which. So you don't know which mountain is the big mountain, and you just start climbing.
Yeah, and you start climbing. Yeah.
And so then you get up on top, and if you chose couch co-op as your mountain, you climb up. And you're like, oh crap, this is a really tiny hill. If you picked, I don't know, like MMO or Battle Royale, well then, that's a humongous mountain that's very difficult to climb, but it's a big mountain. And so the idea of doing your market analysis or your research is to remove some of that cloud. You're never going to get it with precision, but at least remove some of the cloud so you kind of see the overall shape of the different mountains. And then you can decide, which one is worth climbing, which one do you think you have the ability to climb and a background to climb, et cetera. So that's a bit the kind of metaphor that I use.
Does this happen before people, should everyone go through this landscape analysis, which is basically market analysis? Yeah, it's right. And it's super easy to do. Steam Spy is no longer around, but there's so many, like you got Google Trends. Just go on Google Trends, see what's happening on Google. That's like your basis. But this is something that has to happen before you initiate, because we're talking about product, before you initiate even the most basic idea of vision for your product. This is something that you should do. This happens also before I come, like if I were to come at Execution Labs, this is something that you guys expect me to do in the beginning.
Correct.
My pitch has to include that. Like, here's the analysis, here's that, because I think and I think we're going to get a bit into entrepreneurship, but I think this is important. And I think this is a good lesson for all the indies out there. You have to have what is called a value proposition. When you go and pitch something, you need to have some sort of value proposition. And the basic value proposition is, here's the market research, here's what the landscape looks like, here's how our product is going to be better, or how it's going to fit that genre, and here's how we expect it to perform. Do you guys help indies figure that out, or is it something that you expect them to figure out by themselves?
I mean, the way execution labs worked is you were supposed to come with your pitch and have done at least the preliminary. Now, in that case, we were expecting you to have a prototype. So if you had not done your homework and research and you came with a couch co-op prototype, I mean, I'd say, hey guys, you didn't do your research. Like, sorry, this is not compelling. Like, this is not going to go anywhere. Like, sorry. So yeah, in that case, you should have done that research before, realized couch co-op was not a viable mountain to climb, figured out maybe JRPG was better, which you're also passionate about, worked on that prototype, and then come to pitch execution lab, pitch publishers or whatever, with that. And as you say, a value proposition saying, hey, we looked at the market. We saw that JRPGs are still selling well. We have a unique idea, fun idea, cool art, whatever that makes us kind of unique in that category, and why we think we'll perform as good as the ones that are succeeding in that category, which on average are selling 1 million copies each, for example. Now that becomes a compelling pitch, and sort of shows that you've done your homework and that you've invested your own time and blood and tears in a genre that has opportunity. So that's sort of one piece of it. Another aspect. I mean, really, we can go on all day about this, but you have to look at the trends of what's happening and what's selling. I mean, not just sort of genre specific, but also kind of larger trends. So certainly in the past 5 years, we've seen a big move towards more multiplayer or social games. And certainly now with COVID, a much greater emphasis on sort of co-op, social online games. And people are kind of using their games as their way to stay connected and hang out. But that was true even sort of coming up pre-COVID. And certainly the notion of watchability or streamability, right? A game that is fun to watch, a game that is fun for a streamer to play, and have their fans watch them play and all that kind of stuff, and thinking about that and the impact of that and what that has in terms of the promotion of your game and et cetera, is super critical. And so, one sort of example there is games that are kind of wholly consumable don't do well in that context. So think of a single player narrative game that is linear with a fixed ending, and maybe it's like 2 hours long. So some of the walking simulators are Gone Esther, or where the water tastes like wine, kinds of games. Beautiful games, great games, in some cases even masterpieces. But they do not play well given the current trends, right? Because you sit there alone, you play from start to finish, click, click, click. The end is always this. Like, if I watch someone do that on Twitch, then I'm not inspired. I've seen it. I've sort of watched you play it like a movie. I don't need to then go repeat the exact same actions.
Of course.
There's no need for a community to form to discuss strategy, just to share tips. It's like, yeah, load it, play it, and finish it like that. Like, that's the strategy, is play it. And so these kind of consumable games, or like content specific games, really don't do well in today's market. Exception is if it's God of War,
of course,
or if it's Uncharted, where it's just at a blockbuster level that's unfathomable, and Sony is spending tens of millions of dollars on promotion. Like, okay, that can happen.
We don't know, guys,
but most of us are not God of War. So for everybody else, like, what's the opposite of that? It's a very famous indie developer, Jason Rohr, kind of coined this term of what he called it, like infinite or unique situation generators. Games that are unique situation generators are play well into this kind of streaming, Twitch, community-oriented context we now live in. So what are unique situation generators? Well, it's builder games and city games. It's strategy games. It's roguelikes. It's all the esport and multiplayer match-based games, because each match is a unique situation, and so those kinds of games propagate well in the current context. So I mean, that's not a specific genre, because unique situation generators can apply to multiple genres. But that's something else you have to be mindful of. So doing your homework, doing your research, doing your market analysis, you have to be cognizant of those kinds of trends and factors, so that when you come to pitch investors or publishers, you say, hey, our game is going to have this thing where, Twitch fans will interact with the streamers, or, we have a strategy system with the recipes for spells that then you have to come onto the Discord server to like share ingredients, or I don't know, whatever. But like, that's a whole other layer of sort of market intelligence that's required.
Of course. And going past genre, or actually going a bit more meta than genre, did you guys ever discuss about the quintessential vision that can create games and be successful in a space? And mind you, I'm going to go crazy a bit, but here's my theory, and it's something that we explored back in the day. So at Amber, when we were preparing to go into our first original IP, we were talking with our CEO, Mr. Mihai Pohonsu, and he was like, it has to be user-generated content. It has to somehow create a platform and not necessarily a distribution platform, but a platform of interaction. Like, these were the two pillars that we got from him, and oh my God, it blew our heads. It blew our minds, because there's so many ways. The spectrum is so large, but it feels like such a strong foundation. Because if you all of a sudden, if you have a platform on which people can interact, and kind of to your point earlier on, you have people generating content, which makes it interesting for multiplayer. It makes it watchable, etc. So it kind of makes it interactable. Did you guys ever stumble upon this kind of like the truth, the quintessential truth?
Well, yeah. I think there are multiple truths. I mean, UGC is a big one. I mean, certainly if you look at Roblox, I mean, that is all UGC. I mean, it's a UGC platform. I mean, if you look at Dreams from Media Molecule on PlayStation is another one. Stadia recently launched Crata, which is another one. Manticore is a newer company. They got a huge multi-million investment from Unreal. They're creating a more mature UGC platform called Core. And there's a handful of others. So it's definitely a viable focus or focal point. Not even mentioning a bunch of games that are moddable and just sort of that are normal games, but have a UGC component, not necessarily Roblox, which is 100%, a UGC platform. So that's a big one. I think the notion of kind of competitive or match-based games is another one of these kind of truths. If you can create a Counter-Strike, not even Counter-Strike, like essentially chess. Right, chess is infinite. Mm-hmm. Right? We can play chess for eternity, or football or basketball, like some of these things, or Go. I mean, these are infinitely playable games, and so Counter-Strike is another form of chess. Mm-hmm. And look at the success that or League of Legends, right? I mean, League of Legends it's its own sort of form of chess. It's an infinitely playable, strategy competitive game. So I think UGC is kind of one of those major pillars. Competitive, infinitely playable games is another pillar. There's a few other pillars, and I think as time goes on, as technology, industry, consumer taste, all that stuff emerges, those truths will change over time. Like this truth of being streamable and watchable was not relevant 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Now it's super relevant. So this is in part what makes game industry so exciting. It's like what will be the new truth in 5 years? Who knows?
Can you see into the future? Have you found any way of seeing into the future? We've been looking so hard for this. We looked at and this is where we go back to systemic thinking, and I think that this is why systemic thinking is very important for any kind of entrepreneurship, and hopefully we'll get to that as well. But we've been trying to find a way to see into the future. Design thinking seems to be one of those ways, super rooted into market research. Are you teaching the people that come over at Execution Lab any of this? Are you teaching them how to do market research? Are you teaching them how to search for the insights, how to search for user needs?
Yeah. I mean, well, just to be clear, I mean, Execution Labs, we're not taking any new at this point, right? So these things we did were, some years ago. And for those of you who don't know, a Romanian studio was part of Execution Labs, San Sailor, the ones that did.
Oh my God, those guys are amazing. Yes, they're making their second game. Well, they made their second game right now.
They made their second game. Now they're on their third game. So that's actually one of the studios that came to Montreal for a few months to participate. So you'd have to do a separate AmberCast with Christy to ask him what he learned and kind of, what horrors we put him through and the team through. So yeah, I mean, definitely that's some of the stuff we were trying to teach them was that landscape analysis, competitive analysis, looking at trends. I mean, a lot of the consulting work I do now is working with studios and startups to kind of think through those challenges. I mean, I would go one step further, and in many ways, I think, and this is not really sort of seeing the future, but there's two pieces. One, I think it's being fan first.
Mm-hmm.
As a studio, as a developer, creators, we tend to think about the thing we're building. It just has to be cool enough. It has to be beautiful enough. It has to be fun enough. And it's like, I'm spending so much brain power solving the creation problems. The reality is you should be thinking about your audience first. You should be thinking about, who do I want my fans to be? Who do I imagine would be part of my community? And what kinds of games do they want, et cetera, and then sort of developing from there. And I when I say audience, I don't mean, males and females 18 to 24 years old. Like, that's irrelevant. That's sort of nonsense. What I'm suggesting is more like affinities. So if I'm a nerd about space, maybe I'm going to build a studio that makes games to delight other nerds of outer space. Mm-hmm. Who are those space nerds? Where do they hang out? What do they watch? Where, are they on Reddit? Are they on Insta? Like where do those tribes, where are they? And how do I build a studio? How do I build a business that's focused on delighting those space nerds? Mm-hmm. If we all agree that, okay, that's our tribe, that's who we're going for. Okay, well, what kinds of games do space nerds like? Well, they like 4X exploration games. They like, spaceship simulators, Mars colonization games, or whatever. Okay, well, that becomes our choice. Those are the games we're going to make because we've decided that space nerds are our audience. And so kind of thinking in that fan first path is, I think, potentially transformative for studios and startups and entrepreneurs, rather than thinking, what's the cool game mechanic I need to come up with? And then like, okay, well, I guess it's dragons, and then, whatever that. So.
Yeah, and this is where kind of going back to game designers, this is where game designers stumble a bit, because game designers are super attached to mechanics, they're super attached to systems, they're super attached to etc. And you mentioned this part, which is, how do I cater to this audience? How can my studio cater to this audience? Which is no longer thinking about a product, but it's more about thinking about a team, which is important. And you also talk in your 2017 GDC talk, you mentioned this, that it's important to build a team, and it's important to kind of think about not what's the first game that I'm making, but what are the games that I'm going to be making.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, so exactly, like the roadmap is important. It becomes much easier to build that roadmap if you know who your fans are. Like if you say, okay, we're going to build our business around the idea of going after the space nerds, well, then it becomes much easier what that product roadmap should look like. Part of the problem is if I have no target, Well, then maybe one game is a racing game, and the next game is a VR game, and the next game is going to be a mobile hyper casual game. And so you're kind of restarting. You're building no momentum. You're not really reusing technology or knowledge. You're not sort of bringing your fans along for that journey. And the reality is that many of the most successful studios out there, and all the indies that many of us think as, you know, really top, I don't know, like That Game Company or Cappy or Supergiant, the guys that did Bastion, Clay, like all of them, Yacht Club, etc. They're all fan first. You talk to them, and all they talk about is their fans, their community, delighting them, etc., etc. So I think there's a twist, a shift that needs to happen where we realize at the end of the day, this is the attention economy. We're fighting for eyeballs and for fans, and we need to understand who our fans are. And yeah, I mean, related to the team building, the advice that I give to developers who want to embark on an entrepreneurial journey, they'll poke me, they'll ask me for some advice, whether it's, you know, on email or LinkedIn or, you know, in the olden times at a conference. And they'll say, hey, I think I want to go indie. I think I want to be an entrepreneur. I think I want to start something. You know, I'm working on a few gameplay, you know, mechanics. You know, what advice do you have for me? I'm trying to find that one cool mechanic. I said, stop. I said, the first thing you need to do is to find your co-founders. Find the people that will complement you. If you're an artist, then find your programmer, find your business person. If you're a business person, find your artist and your programmer. If you're a programmer, find your designer. And so the most important thing to do when you're starting is to find the co-founders that you want to do it with. Then as co-founders, think about what kind of studio do you want to build, values, pillars, that kind of stuff, vision. But importantly, decide who you're going to go after, like what's your audience. And so if we're all space nerds, okay, we're all going to go after the space nerds. You know, don't like if two of us are space nerds and you're like a dragon nerd or a ninja nerd, and then it's like, well, you're not really going to fit, so maybe you shouldn't be part of the team. And then once we've found the co-founders, decided on our target audience and who our fans should be, could be, then we start thinking about genre, doing our market analysis, you know, and then we start figuring out, okay, if we've decided 4X is the right genre, okay, now what can we do that's different, unique, innovative, and interesting? Like the mechanic design piece is like the fourth or fifth step, not the first step. So
yeah. And so do people? Have you ever funded a team rather than a game?
Well, I mean, Execution Labs was always investing in the team, right? Execution Labs was an equity-based studio investor. So we were absolutely looking at the team, vision, roadmap, all that kind of stuff, and the game was very much secondary. So, I mean, that's a whole other conversation about project funding versus company funding. And so, you know, most publishers are funding the project. So they're very curious about the viability of that project and whether or not your team can deliver it. On the company side, so that's more like angel investors and venture capitalists, you know, they're looking at the co-founding team and your grit and perseverance and what your vision is and what insight you bring and what the sort of the roadmap for the company is. Because they're investing in the company, and so they have to have a sense that you can grow the value of the company, because that's where they're going to see their return on investment, as opposed to a publisher, which is investing in that project and taking a revenue share on that project. So much different mindset. But I have another GDC lecture on funding, which covers that in much more detail.
Very good lecture, by the way. That one is good as well. We're 55 minutes in, and I can keep going. Like, how are you doing on time? Can we keep going? I have a bunch of other.
3 minutes. You got 3 minutes.
Got 3 minutes. What are I don't have a 3-minute question, but I do have a question that's been bugging me for a while. I think that one of the most important thing is when you're building a team, which is kind of to your point about tribes, it's to get the right people. Are you seeing traits of apart from understanding entrepreneurship? Oh, and I also want to cover books, but apart from entrepreneurship and understanding the landscape and kind of thinking long term, is there a cultural pattern that you're seeing in teams that are succeeding? Because it's important to get the right people, and it's important for them to have kind of the same culture and think in the same ways. I think failing fast is one of those important things. And it's super important because it's not about we're gonna mess everything up. It's about we're gonna test something, we're gonna get our data, we're gonna get our conclusions, and we're gonna keep going.
Yeah.
Right? Thinking lean startup model.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Is there some other things that you're seeing in teams? Is there some other perks of successful teams?
Yeah. I mean, there's long lists of this. I mean, one of them is kind of alignment of the definition of success. So if you kind of isolated each of the co-founders and say, what's your definition of success? You want them all to say the same thing, more or less. Right? You don't want the business person to say, well, I want to be a billionaire. And then you ask the designer, and the designer says, well, I want to win, festivals. And you ask the programmer of like, well, I'm trying to produce patent technology. Like if each of them are pulling in a different direction, even though those are all valid forms of success, it's hard to really build the business if everyone's kind of pulling for a different kind of success. So you want to see alignment of definition of success. This sort of tolerance for uncertainty, willingness to kind of fail fast, learn from failure, et cetera, is a big one. And then you have all the other stuff around like grit and perseverance and tenacity. And, the founders of BioWare had this great term, Ray and Greg, called humbitious, which I don't know if I covered in that lecture, but, you have to be humble, but also ambitious at the same time, right? Like you want to conquer the world. You want to be the best, whatever you're doing, and just do great, but you also have to be humble and have humility and understand that you don't have all the answers and that you can take feedback and you can be coached and you reach out for help and you help others and, just sort of be, kind of be a good member of the community and treat your employees well and all that kind of stuff. So
but it's safe.
Ambition is a great.
Because there's you're going to fail so many times. And if you think that you have all the answers and you know everything, you're going to fall from such great heights.
Yeah.
It kind of goes, it's an impact course with failing fast. You cannot be humble and fail fast. You have to be humble in order to fail fast. Otherwise, it won't work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ambitious is, yes, you mentioned that in 2017. And it's
So books is the final thing?
Books.
I still read a lot of books. I mean, Lean Startup, I think, is a great one. It's kind of like this recipe of how to fail successfully. I like it a lot. There's a great book on innovation called Where Good Ideas Come From Stephen Johnson. That's a really good one. I mean, if you're interested in the venture capital funding side of things, there's a great book called Venture Deals. That's a really interesting one. I have a whole stack of books here. There's too many of them. I mean, those are some good ones. Medici Effect. Effect is another one on innovation, but also this kind of idea of diversity of thought and diversity of opinion being extremely valuable, which I think is an interesting way to look at inclusivity and sort of process to get lots of ideas on the table. So that's a really good book, a more rare one, Medici Effect. All right, man. Gabi.
It's been fun. Thank you.
An honor.
Audience to 12.
Oh, wonderful.
It's been a really good talk.
It's just great to chat with you. And of course, I'm a fan of Amber, and I've known Catalin for a long time, and a few other folks there at Amber. So good to chat.
Yes, it's an awesome company. It's been an awesome chat. Thank you. You're getting blurry. We should stop. Let's end on that.
And my camera's tired. There we go.
Hopefully we'll see you again.
Very good. Ciao. Bye.
Bye.